Now, the South African Airways strike might be over, but the problems of SAA remain. It's bankrupt and it won't receive any further bailouts. At power utility Eskom, the appointment of a new CEO has embroiled the government in a debate about transformation and privatization of the power utility. Now, Acting Director General in the Department of Public Enterprises, Khatatso Tlakudi, now joins me in the studio. Good morning, DG. Thank you so much for joining me. First questions first. Are you going to be able to pay the salaries of SAA staffers at the end of the month?
Good morning, Karima, and thank you for having us on your show. The answer to your question is it will depend on how the discussions that SAA is having with its lenders end up. We are hopeful that they will produce positive results, but obviously those results are obviously dependent on government showing the necessary support to the entity.
Now, we know that the Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni, was out of the country, arrived back on Thursday. He's on record as saying SAA is a liability, it should be sold off. He's not interested in a bailout. Pravin Gordhan has said that the country, just cannot afford the increases. We know that the increases are going to be staggered. So who are the lenders that the SAA management is going to be talking to? Does it include government?
Well, what is required from government is a government guarantee. The lenders are mainly local banking institutions. And with regard to the comments that were made by Minister Mboweni, you can't fault them. The business track record up to now shows that it has been unable to live within its means. It has been unable to generate adequate returns for the shareholder. But we believe that, Karima, with the team that we have put in place at SAA, that there are some green shoots that are trying to develop. And it's unfortunate that the strike came at the time that it did. For instance, in this financial year, the business has been able to realize 500 million rands of savings from about 900 million rands target that it had set for itself. From our side as a department, we have said that is not enough. We'd like to see more savings from the business. In all the businesses recorded about has indicated that it has about 3.7 billion rands shortfall. We have said to it the 2 billion rands as per the commitment from National Treasury to provide working capital that depending on the guarantee coming through can be taken care of. But you must find a way of saving on this 1.7 billion rands.
Let me, before you go into the details of how they can get savings, let's get back to the question of whether people are going to receive salaries. When you were in negotiations with the unions, can you tell us, are pilots being paid? Have they been paid? Are other types of workers being treated differently? So who exactly has received payment and who still needs to actually get payment at the end of this month?
The pilots have been paid.
So why have you chosen to pay the pilots and not, let's say, the baggage handlers?
Yeah, if I can finish the pilots' payment was a product of an agreement that was in place with the pilots with SAA. And that went to arbitration when the entity indicated that we did not have money to pay you. And the pilots won. So the management was forced to pay. And unfortunately, that made things difficult when it came to the other categories of employees. And because when the management said there's no money to pay, employees did not believe what management was saying.
Especially since the pilots were paid.
Exactly. And that's the point that we had made. We met with the pilots. We indicated that this situation, though it's an outcome of a legal process, is making things very difficult in terms of saving the airline. And we had said in those initial discussions that they must pay back the money. That's the point that from the department that we are putting, so that the negotiations with the other unions can go a little bit better. Unfortunately, we are where we are now. The strike has been settled. There's a 5.9% that's been agreed on, depending on whether funds can be located.
Now that's a big depend, right? I mean, literally a pause button can be hit there.
Yeah.
What is a bank that is going to have to come to the party off the back of a government guarantee going to be looking for when they are prepared to, forward the money to SAA? Part of what the unions were claiming as a victory was that they were going to have a say in where you can cut, and what savings you can make. And one of the big things that they want is, of course, something like insourcing. Is that something that the banks will think is a positive thing that will allow them to be much more optimistic and put money into SAA, and will government underwrite that?
Well, the banks, like any other funder, they want a credible business plan on the table, and a plan that can be met. Because the track record of the business up to now is that they've not been able to meet their business plans.
So a quick question, do you have faith as government in the management of SAA to put that credible plan forward? We've just had a recent resignation. The people in charge of the airline, do they know what they're doing? Are you satisfied that they will be able to satisfy lenders?
We have had an injection recently of very capable executives, Karima, and we believe that a team that is credible and that can be able to produce that business plan is taking shape. Obviously, the board has gone out to fill the position of the CEO, and we are looking for someone with the right level of stature to fill that position, as well as the CRO position, the Chief Restructuring Officer position. So we believe that that can be done, and we really believe the team up to now has shown itself that really it can produce the results that we require. It's unfortunately also a bit late in the game, if I put it that way. You know, some of these steps could have been taken a few years back. And
in fact, that is what a lot of analysts are saying. They are saying the rescue is coming too late, that as a business, SAA is too far gone to be saved. Is that the view of government, given the fact that the finance minister has been so outspoken, and you've just earlier said that he's spot on? So, I mean, is it throwing good money after bad? Should the SAA just not close shop?
Well, it's spot on in terms of the history of the business. We believe going forward with the right level of support that the business can turn around. And as government, we cannot be insensitive to the fact that there are a lot of people, I mean almost 10,000 people at SAA who are dependent on that entity, and also in the rest of the aviation sector, and obviously the hospitality industry as well. We can't be not take those factors into account. But as my minister has indicated, SAA is not too big to fail as well. And this is an important message to the internal stakeholders within the SAA, management as well as organized labor, that they have to come up with a solution to save this particular business. And if they are not able to do so, its failure really will be on their conscience and in their hands.
But if one looks at airlines, the size of SAA, the profit margins are never impressive anywhere in the world. People are talking about 2% profit margins and so on.
Correct.
So this idea that SAA must be making massive profits, in reality, if one compares it with airlines in the same kind of situation as SAA, is not borne out by reality. So when we say SAA must be a going concern, what exactly in financial terms are we talking about?
Well, it has to be able to wash its own face. It has to be able to, the cost that it generates, it has to be able to take care of those out of its own revenues. That's really the fundamental point that we're speaking of. Government, our entities across the board don't pay dividends to government. And that's something that we're also hoping to change going forward. But that's not really what we are calling for here with SAA. And there are examples, Karima, of airlines that have been run very well, that are impacting very positively on their economies, while obviously generating those thin margins, which is typical of airlines across the board. And even for us, we are an end-of-the-world destination.
Yes.
There's New Zealand, which is also, I mean, it's even further south.
But I mean, look at
us,
Qantas. Qantas is out in Australia, but it is one of the top airlines. How do you account for that? I mean, I agree, for example, that our situation is really bad just in terms of our geography, and that is why the airlines in the Gulf do so well. I mean, maintenance happened there and so on.
Correct.
But it doesn't explain the success of Qantas, for example, over SAA, because, I mean, Australia is on the other side of the world as well. Why can't we follow the example of Qantas, for example?
It all boils down to leadership. And Karima, we should not also have amnesia in terms of what happened at the SO. It's not so long ago.
Yes.
The destruction that was done there, which was, the boards were changed. And
let's just say people
which,
stole.
Exactly.
You know, there was thievery going on.
Well, the conditions for thievery to happen were created. And that's really what we are dealing with now. I mean, we have installed leadership at our various entities. There is obviously effort now to strengthen the board of SA and ensure that you have the right executive team in place. Because once that is in place, the rest tend to take care of itself.
Okay, let's shift focus from SAA. Let's go to Eskom. We have a huge debate that has taken off in the country around the race of the new CEO of Eskom, who happens to come from the private sector, from Nampak. There's a story in today's Sunday Times that says it's unnamed sources, so I'm reluctant to quote it, but there is a sentiment that black professionals didn't want to come to Eskom. And of course, there is a sense that everyone is looking at the Nampak share price and how it's doing to be able to see whether this is the right pick. And then, of course, there's the question of Mr. Mbowene's personal financial interest related to Nampak. How did you get to the CEO? And is it true that a lot of senior black executives just refuse to come to take up this position?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the black executives are being isolated in the statement. But, executives across the demographic landscape were approached, and quite a number of them indicated that, unfortunately, they are not willing to join an SOE.
And what was the reason why they were unwilling?
Well, you have to look at what has happened in the last few years. A lot of careers have been destroyed. We have people that stood up to the malfeasance that were going on in the SOs, and they have lost their livelihoods, they have lost their houses. I mean, we have heard what happened at the Zondo Commission. A number of those executives came forward and said, we have been destroyed by joining this entity. That's unfortunately the stigma that we have to deal with, the challenge that we have to overcome if we're going to attract the best people to the SOCs, because that's what we need.
But now the question around race is a question that we can't escape given our history. But we also have to talk about the national question. We also have to talk about social cohesion. The Freedom Charter says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. Would you disagree with the notion that Eskom cannot have a black CEO or cannot have a white CEO, and that transformation is just about race and just about pigmentation?
That's not how the transformation debate was framed post-1994. The main issue was that our SOCs, like other entities of government, were instruments of oppression. And that the practices and the cultures that have developed in these particular entities needed to be changed. It unfortunately descended into issues of race and numbers when people started to look after their own personal interests.
In fact, I want to point out something. The former head of COSATU's investment vehicle, Mr. Machila, became the head of Eskom, and he was, of course, involved in bleeding Eskom dry under the state capture project. In fact, since democracy, I think Eskom has had one non-black CEO. A lot of black CEOs were either set up when they weren't prepared to go with wrongdoing from the board side, or were complicit in wrongdoing. So how do you make sure that whoever you put in place is someone that will play in the national interest and not in the interest of their friends, their politicians, and the connections that they have, and their own pockets?
Well, ultimately, it boils down to, we can do verification tests on us and integrity checks that we do to ensure that the people, on top of obviously being competent and being able to perform the position, that those checks are done to ensure that you have people who are upstanding into. But if yourself as an executive appointed into this entity and the board member intend to defraud, that's going to happen. But all we can do is put the right controls in place to ensure it does not happen going forward. And the issue of being patriotic, loving our people enough to also hear their pain. I mean, some of our SOCs, the people that are in there, some of them, the best looked after economically in our country. And those entities are intended to serve really some of the poorest people in our country.
So why don't we cap the salaries of the people who head up SOCs? Why don't we say that if we want workers to take the pain, if we want to recover, everybody has to feel the pain. Mark Barnes said when he took over the post office, the first thing he did was he sat with trade union representatives and went through the books with them so that they could see the financial health of the company and see how everyone, by doing particular things, are going to be able to reap the benefits in the end. Is that what is required?
Well, we have remuneration guidelines that were approved by government in 2016. Those are obviously being implemented, but unfortunately those are also pegged to what is happening in the rest of the economy, because the people that we are seeking to attract into these positions are also sitting in the private sector. Now, it's a bigger debate, it's a societal debate. It's about how the surplus that is generated by our economy is shared between the elite and the working masses. And we know currently we are not doing so good as a country. So that's so it's a debate that goes actually beyond the SOCs, and it's a debate that we need to have.
It's a final question. I'm out of time. I'm just going to steal a time from the next segment. My view is that the CEO rather that is going to go there has to implement government policy, and government policy is about breaking this entity up into three sections. So in many ways, this person's job has already been set for him. He can't make new policy. Is that a correct understanding? And many people have interpreted that as a code for privatization.
Well, the state at the moment does not have enough in its coffers to recapitalize these particular entities. Now, where is the money going to come from? We have to find a way of bringing the private sector into this particular space. And we have a policy which we call the private sector participation that we have developed to enable that. And already, the private sector is already participating in our entities. I mean, some of at our ports, some of the terminals are being operated by the private sector. Some of the divisions of Denel, multinationals were brought in to help to revive those particular entities after they found themselves in in the same state that we find with the entities we have discussed this morning.
All right, DG, thank you so very much. This is a conversation that is obviously ongoing. We will look very, clearly at what is going to happen tomorrow and whether SAA is going to be able to get lenders to give them that money so that they can make good on that strike deal that has been concluded. Thank you very much for your time. We'll surely have you back here next time.
Thank you, Karima. I think on SA, let's just say it will probably take a couple of more days than what has been reported.
Okay, so a couple of more days to see whether that deal will in fact hold. Next up, we take a look at the stories making headlines in the weekend newspapers. Do stay tuned.